All right, we're back. We're back, Brandon. And today we have a monster episode for our Lifting Nerds podcast, as we have one of the GOATs in our minds and in a lot of other people's minds in the natural bodybuilding world. We have the great godfather of bodybuilding, Mr. Jeff Alberts, here today with us today to speak about natural bodybuilding. And also, as you said, as we were speaking off air, we're just three dudes here talking about lifting, aren't we?
Yeah, 100%.
Well, I don't know, three dudes. I mean, I'm a goat and I'm a monster. So I'm thinking like I'm this goat with big horns and evil eyes coming out. We're going to talk about natural bodybuilding. Yeah, sounds good.
Makes sense, right? Totally,
Yep.
absolutely.
That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So Jeff, because I haven't really personally get to I've seen your stuff on Instagram. I follow you around, I see your lifts, I see your prepping, and so is my lovely partner here. Not in that way. My podcast partner here, Brandon. He's
He's a good
also
looking dude though, man. I mean, look, he's perfectly shaven. He's got nice eyebrows. I mean, he's got it going on, man.
Oh,
reminds me of my coach, doesn't he? So you guys both are on prep. Well, he's on prep. He's about like 4 weeks away. So, because this actually really this topic we're gonna talk about is we wanna really touch base on how natural bodybuilding is different from a lot of the media bodybuilders that we know of today, and social media has really been pushing that some pro athletes, they compete at least 4 to 5 times a year, and this is what we're going to be touching base on if this is feasible or manageable in a natural body building standpoint. But before we get into that, I want everybody, and including myself, this is actually my own personal question as well, so to get to know you a little bit better. So just would you tell us, how long you've been a coach for?
So I've been coaching since 2010. So we're talking, this is like my 14th year coaching. So yeah, we started 3D Muscle Journey back in like late 2009, and then we started coaching in early parts of 2010. And
So
it was kind of a very humble beginnings for me personally, because I think that first year I might have coached maybe three or four people, just because I didn't feel like I had enough confidence to take on full loads. So like I wanted to just start slow, get experience, make sure I don't mess people up, because that was my biggest fear, was messing people up.
yeah.
And then, as you take a couple of people through some contest prep, and it's a positive experience, like, okay, get a little more confidence. Let me add a few more. So it was kind of just like a slow, gradual process to where I got to a point where I can like handle a full load of athletes successfully.
that's
That,
awesome. Yeah, go ahead.
that
Go ahead.
yeah, that totally makes sense because I feel like if you just are given like 30 people at once, then it's just like, yeah, I could see that being a complete nightmare. That makes sense
Yeah,
to
yeah.
slowly. Yeah.
So if you started, have you been competed in natural body for quite a while? So was it before the whole 3D MJ came together?
Oh yeah. So my first show was back in 1993.
That's
Yeah.
that's
So
before I was born. Yeah, that's it.
yeah.
Wait,
So I've
before
been
you were born?
Yeah, it was 1994 for me. It was when I was born. So yeah.
So he was still in the womb. I was on
Yeah.
stage. He was in the womb.
Get the
Yeah.
hell out of here. You're 94?
Yeah,
Oh,
1994. Yeah.
oh,
I'm 28 right now.
I totally forgot about that.
Yeah. So that was my first show. It was 93. Prior to that, like I started lifting in 86. So that
Now,
was the
when you
first
started
time.
lifting, I was 1 year old when you started lifting. Holy shit.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. So I've kind of seen a lot over the years. I was like before the internet existed in a sense,
Yeah.
like training through that era. And then as the internet kind of progressed, and so I've seen a lot of things over the years, and it's kind of interesting how things have changed but haven't changed at the same time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of interesting. But yeah, I can say I have a ton of experience. So as an athlete, a lot of experience. Like there's a lot of things that I've done that in hindsight I probably should have had no business doing. But at the same time, going through all that has helped me to coach people like Brandon, so he doesn't make like mistakes I made. And I continue to learn because I still don't know everything there is to know about bodybuilding, and even myself, I'm still learning. Because now I'm older, it's like I'm trying to learn bodybuilding now with this older body. and
Yeah.
how to do things the best that I can, and in a sense keep that longevity going. But yeah, just those experiences, it's you can't like replace that value at all. Like you can read and research and do all this stuff, but until you actually like get in there and do it, like that's when you really learn.
I totally
100%.
agree. Yeah, I totally agree because I had this conversation with I think Brian with a couple of weeks ago, and I was post show, and then I was getting frustrated because with this body post, because I'm 30 38 this year, and then it feels different when it was 3 years ago. Just 3 years ago, it felt completely different for me. Just adapting this new body, and he did, eventually he did mention, he's like, you are getting older, dude. And I was like, yeah, that's true. And then now hypertrophy means for me, and maybe for you, it's just maintenance, is so called. For us to actually gain muscle is a much slower process. And being able to step on stage, and I started lifting very late into I've actually started lifting past my 20s. So I was like late 20s when I actually started lifting seriously for bodybuilding. So it's a very big disadvantage, advantages for me compared to when you started lifting, when Brandon hasn't even been born yet. So yeah, we no lost that little time, um but in terms of competing as an athlete yourself, what is a competition season look like this year for you? It's
So
February.
I was ambitious when I set my game plan up, because like, okay, I'm gonna do some shows in the summer, I'll do it in the fall. But now that this is my 8th week into it, and the first 7 weeks has been a little slow, like definitely a little more turtle paced. So summer is looking like it's not going to be feasible, which is probably a good thing, because I think my goals were just a little too ambitious. Because trying to stretch your season out, especially as a natural bodybuilder, from like, being super lean in summer, holding that all the way to the end of the year, let's say doing worlds, it's a tall order. I did it in 2019, not purposely. And we could talk a little bit about that season because there's a lot of context there. But by the time I hit peak conditioning, which was probably in the neighborhood of August, September, and then I had to try to hold that or try to better it in a sense to November, I actually kind of regressed. So the conditioning actually improved. Like I was leaner, but it wasn't necessarily a better physique because I looked like I lost a little bit of size. So yes, leaner, not as full though. So overall package looked better a little. It was better when I wasn't as lean and depleted. So it's like you have to kind of strategize in a way where if you're ambitious with your goals and you want to do like, in a sense, multiple shows and they're spread out, like you need to be strategic as far as like how spread out they are. And if they are pretty spread out, then maybe it's like there needs to be a stopgap in there. So the reason I didn't have a stopgap was the fact that I didn't have any shows lined up for my 2019 season other than Muscle Mayhem, which is in July. That was the only target I had, because it was a 5-year absence from the stage. So I was like, I just want to get on stage again. It's been a while. I want to be able to do it. So I got on stage, I did it, did well, had fun. I'm like, oh, cool. There's another show 4 weeks from now. Let's do that one. So it's like, okay, let's get leaner for that one. And then I had a couple of posing appearances that wasn't scheduled. It was just late thing. Like, hey, can you fly up to Washington and do a guest posing next week? Okay. So it's just like, and then I guest posed in Mexico City. And so it's just like one thing after another. So kind of a double-edged sword, like having those things kind of pop up, it sparked more motivation, and I was having so much fun doing it. But at the same time, the negative was that it just stretched the season way too far out. So now, like in a sense, like I said, my initial goals this year was a little too ambitious, summer, fall, but now I'm like, okay, it's kind of nice that I actually progressed on the slower side. So now I'm putting all my marbles into October, November, just a two-month window, nice close together, so that way I can peak and hopefully, do well.
What is the one in October?
That would be the WMBF Washington State Championships.
Yeah, okay.
So that's going to be in Seattle.
In that area, I think. I can't remember the exact city, but that will be a qualifier for me for Worlds.
Oh yeah, yeah. So, okay, yeah, and yeah, there's
And
no
then
point for
Worlds
him.
in
Yeah,
November. Yeah.
yeah. There's no point for him to come to Calgary to do the WWF International.
It would be fun. Like that would be
Yeah.
fun to do that. The the only thing is like finances. So as you know, this is not a cheap sport to participate in.
Yeah. No. Right.
So the
Yeah.
travel and the entry fees, all that stuff. And I have a family to think about. That's like my highest priority. So I have to make sure I'm strategic logistically
Yeah.
and cheaper flight to Washington from where I'm at.
Oh,
And
absolutely. Oh,
yeah.
absolutely. Oh,
And I'd have to
absolutely.
go back twice. So it's like October, fly to Washington, come back home, fly again in November to Seattle because the world is in Seattle.
Oh shit. So you
Yeah,
have to go back to Washington twice in 4 weeks.
pretty much. Yeah.
And okay.
So if you think about that, that's like, okay, each trip's probably going to be a neighborhood of like $1,000 to $1,500.
Wait, where are you
And
located?
I'm in California, so it's not too
Oh,
far
okay.
of a travel. But I
Okay.
mean, airfare,
Yeah, that's true.
hotels,
Yeah.
if you have to rent a car, the food, the tan, like all that stuff adds up.
Yeah.
And the prize money, I mean, if you're lucky enough to place, I mean, you might recoup a little bit, but the fact is like you're probably not going to come out on the positive side at the end of the season as a pro.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a lot of it,
Yeah, that's true.
a lot of it's more like it's a hobby, right?
Yeah, it
And
is. It
so
is.
that's why for me it's important. Like, hey, Brandon, make sure you're having fun doing this because you're paying me a decent amount of money to coach you. So let's make sure we're having fun. Yes, it sucks. You're kind of hungry at times, but let's make sure you're having fun.
Yeah, and I feel like for the most part, it's been a really fun experience. Just yeah, there's those odd days where you're like, okay, this is a rough day, but yeah, for the most part, I just love like chasing it, right? Like being able to chase after like getting on stage, and like for me, it's been yeah like 6 years since I've competed last, so like it's so exciting to finally be able to get onto that stage as well. Yeah,
Yeah, because that was a big 5 year gap for me, and a lot of it was like I tried. It's just there was a failed prep in there. Body wasn't cooperating. There's some stressors, so you have to kind of stop. So it's a little disappointing when you have to stop something like that.
yeah,
So it's just like, man, I need to get back on there. I want to prove to myself I could actually still do this. And I was like at an older age because in 2014 I was like on a high level, like fourth at Worlds, and a
yeah.
5 year hiatus. Now I'm 48. I'm like, can I still do this thing on a high level? So there's a lot of uncertainties there. But yeah, it's like it's the chase, right? It's that journey. It's a process itself.
For sure. One point I wanted to talk about is just essentially some of the tips that you have for having like an extended season. Because I know for me personally, preps in the past, like I would only do like one or possibly just two shows. So I've never really had like a season where I did like 3 or 4 shows, which I'm going to be probably doing this year. So is there any like specific points or like strategies that you like to use? I know you've talked to me about it a little bit on like coaching calls and stuff like that, but for like the audience on how to stay in a good mental space, stay like nice and full, try not to lose a bunch of muscle mass when you are doing an extended season, like do you have any like major points for that?
I think it's just like we kind of mapped out your timeline. It's just like, hey, we're relocating these shows. What's the gaps looking like? And you try to plan ahead as much as possible, as you know. Like your prep's been, let's just say, really straightforward.
Yeah,
We haven't made, I don't even think we've made too many adjustments. I can't even recall in one. Like it's just been very straightforward. Your body's very predictable. Most people aren't like you. And I think a lot of it has to do too with you're just very precise with things.
yeah,
Your execution is almost like spot on flawless. But a lot of people have a hard time adhering, especially if let's say they're not as experienced as you. Like if they're just starting out, it's their first prep, like it might not be a good idea to space their seasons out like that. I have a first timer and he says, I want to compete in summer. And then, hey, if we do well and we go to Worlds in November, I'm like, maybe that's a goal for the next prep. Let's just tackle 1 or 2 shows, maybe clump them together. I always recommend at least more than one show, maybe 2 or 3. So that because the first one, it is you're nervous.
yeah,
If as a coach, you don't really know that body too well, so things could be a little unpredictable. So if you have 2 shows, the second one, it's usually a little bit more of a relaxed environment. People usually have a lot more fun at the second one. So if you group it together anywhere between, let's say, within a month, it's probably a good place to put it to have 2 shows. But if we're talking like 2 months, 3 months in between, and you're trying to hold conditioning level that long for someone who's inexperienced, that can be quite the challenge. So of course, putting in some stop gaps, like I said, okay, diet breaks, that type of thing, you can kind of get through that period. But you also have to take into consideration not just how it impacts the athlete as far as like physically how it's going to feel having them hold that for so long, but how does that impact their quality of life and what goes on outside the gym? Especially if we're talking, just throw an example out there. If someone's married with three young kids, they're working full-time job, and it's so how much is that, putting a burden on that family? Is it worth it now to do that? Maybe it is. Maybe they're like, hey, I got this. My wife's supportive. I'm handling it well. Cool. Finish it out. But if not, it's like, can you still have 2 years from now, 3 years from now, whatever? Like, bodybuilding shows are a dime a dozen. There's always going to be shows every season.
That makes sense. I do find sometimes you don't really realize how you're behaving too, like from past preps. Like sometimes you don't realize that you're not paying as much attention to your significant other, or that you may be a little bit more short, or like not the funnest person to be around in prep. So like I feel like for this prep, I've been trying to like manage all those things and be present with people and stuff like that. But I do notice with like first time competitors that like, yeah, a lot of times they tend to take it extremely serious and push away different things in their lives. So like, yeah, being aware of those kind of things and making sure that you're still spending quality time with family and making people a priority.
Sacrifice to win, right?
Yeah.
You hear that? You got to sacrifice to win, bro. Not your marriage, not your kids. So I think it's important that you have that awareness, like you mentioned, but still, as hard as we try, and I'm a veteran, I'm a veteran of this sport. I've done this forever. There's still moments where I realize like, oh shit, I'm being an asshole. And my wife's just being very, very patient with me, Yeah. So it's like no matter how hard you try or how aware you are, you're not going to be yourself when you're like 7% body fat, 6% body fat, and you're more food focused. Like you can see a hot girl walk by and you're like, oh man, like, in the off season, but during prep, 7% body fat, you're like, man, look at that cheeseburger right there. Like you're excited about that. So it's stuff that doesn't get talked about too often online. It's like this real stuff that we're talking about, like the human side of things, because it's not about like sacrificing to win, just for a trophy at the end of the day. Yeah, there's gonna be some sacrifices, but there's always like breaking points. Like how far do you want to take that? And what I've learned as a coach, probably it was my second or third year coaching. And back then I would have more local competitors than I do, like, obviously you're in Canada, so working with people from afar. But back then I would go to the local shows and I'd have athletes there, and I'd have conversations with their significant other. And I had with this one athlete, and I was talking to his wife, and he was backstage getting ready and all that stuff. And I'm like, so how's he doing? How's things going? Yeah. Well, of course his check-ins were like, everything's great. But what she was saying was like, okay, that's a different story than what I'm hearing from him. So like you said, sometimes you just don't realize, like you think you're handling things well, but really you're not until you kind of take a big step back. And it's usually after the prep's over, you reflect a month, 2 months, 3 months later, you're reflecting on it. You're like, yeah, I can kind of see what maybe she was talking about now.
Yeah. And I feel like that's where communication skills come into play. Like that's what I've been trying to do, like this prep too, just communicating with my girlfriend a lot and just making sure like if I'm doing something that's like causing issues, be sure to call me out, and like trying to constantly have that open conversation and not shut people out. So like, yeah, I feel like that part of it's like very, very important too, to
it is
be aware of that. And yeah.
Like the other day, I'm not a morning person. Even honestly, when I have a lot of food in me, I'm not a morning person. I need like 2 cups of coffee to even start talking. I'm sitting there, I'm having my coffee, and my son wakes up. He's sitting right next to me, and him and my wife are just like morning people. They're and I'm just like, he's just going like in my ear. He's all excited about telling me stuff, and I'm just like, and I'm dieting, right? So it's even worse. So I kind of looked at him and I go, can you let dad like just have coffee then breakfast, and then I'll talk to you? He's like, he kind of goes, okay. So I mean, as much as like I don't want to be like that, like the fact is like that's just the reality of it. So it's just kind of cueing him, like, just give me a moment.
Yeah.
Like that way he kind of knows the boundaries, he respects the boundaries. And then same thing, like I want to make sure that at other times I'm like a lot more present for them. So
Yeah.
like you said, the communication goes a long ways.
I find too with like eating food, like I feel like I'm good now this prep with like having somebody eat like really good food in front of me. But I know in previous preps where like I've had like ex-girlfriends like eat like candy and a bunch of junk food like right in front of me, and like that always created like issues. But I feel like this prep I've been able to like manage those kind of emotions more, and like always think back to, okay, like in my off season I'm like always so freaking stuffed and I don't want to have any more food, so I always just revert back to, okay, I'm not always gonna feel like this. I'm gonna be feeling like that in the next like 6 months or something. So I find that always helps me kind of manage that.
Yeah, because back in the day, I remember like my ex-wife eating pizza, her family eating pizza in front of me, and I was like irritated. Like, you guys know I'm dieting, but you're taking me to these pizza places, and I'm like frustrated with them. And then I'm like, now it's like looking in hindsight, like that's just a selfish way to kind of look at it. Like, just because I'm prepping, I'm gonna try to force other people around me not to eat the things they want to eat.
Yeah.
So it's like, to me, like actually we were at my mother-in-law's house the other night and they were having pozole, like she made this like nice Mexican dish. And my brother-in-law was like, "Doesn't this bother you?" I'm like, "Doesn't phase me anymore, man." I go, I do my thing and that's it. I don't like look at like I'm missing out on something because I have a goal and I'm trying to meet it.
Yeah,
And it's not about food right now. Like food is just a tool for me to get to where I want to go.
for sure.
So it's a lot of it's how you frame it. And for me, I like, okay, if we're choosing to prep, that doesn't mean like everybody around us should be catering to us. Like we need to change our like how we do things, our behaviors around them.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I honestly can't resonate with both of you. Yeah, I can't resonate honestly because I'm on the other side of the spectrum. What I resonated was on the 3DMJ episode on how to do a surplus. That's the episode I actually resonated with. Because for me, I haven't always been very food focused. I could go hours without eating and I could just fill my hunger with caffeine and I can live for the entire day. So dieting down for me was, just cutting down into the show was fairly easy. Even Brian was just scratching his head. It's like, I don't know how you do it, man, but it's okay. If it works, it worked. Great. And then, so this is the season where I'm finding it very, 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 very challenging to trying to just shove stuff down my throat. Um, so I don't know, I don't know how you guys do it, but I wish I could. Um, but
No, I've
yeah,
had athletes like that of like they just like when it's time to prep, they almost embrace the fact that they get to eat less food
yeah, yeah,
because they're so
yes.
tired of shoving it down. I had one athlete, it was like middle of the off season, and we're talking 4,500 calories a day.
Yeah,
And where he lives, it's like it's a humid environment. So he's like, I
yeah,
am so stuffed all the time, and he's hot. I'm tired of eating, and I'm like, okay, let's just do a cut, like a mini cut, just to give your digestive system a break. And he's like, no, he's just like, we're gonna keep doing this because it's working, and I want he just had a hard goal, and he was just set on doing it. But when we started prepping, yeah, he was just like a nice break. So
yeah.
actually, yeah, he embraced the fact that he gets to be in a deficit, which is a little
Yeah.
more on the rare side, but there are people out there that like that. Yeah, that was me back in the day because I used to eat a lot in the off season, a lot.
Ah,
Mhm.
yeah. So
I
that's
I
it.
feel like for my prep, like the first like 10 pounds was definitely fine. I just find, yeah, always the last 10 to 5 pounds to come off is always like the biggest struggle for me. Like even yeah, in the off season too, like trying to get the food in does start to become an issue over time, but I don't think it's quite as bad as like Adrian, like how he has it. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Brian actually made this not really new. It's becoming a little bit more popular and I guess Team 3D is very very well known for feeding their athletes into the show. So I've got to got the honor to experience that. My last prep in October. That's when I actually got to meet Alberto in Calgary.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when we did WNBF Calgary then. So that's when I got to meet him. And Brian literally fed me for 4 weeks, 5 weeks or 4 weeks. We just kept feeding and feeding and feeding. And then I think it was 1 week prior, or maybe 1.5 week prior, he just kind of cut down like 3 days and then just fed me into the show. So it's been more, I think it's a lot more common right now, which I'm very, very happy that it's more common now. Like, maybe could you explain that, what is that? How does that actually work?
I think the theory is accepted and it's common. I think as far as the practice, like it kind of just depends on the individual and how well a coach can set that trajectory, how well an individual can execute that protocol. So it's not like, I would say right now the percentage of that happening for me isn't like 90%. It's more like, maybe it's like 50 if you're lucky. You take someone who's like this gentleman here, like, yeah, it's probably likely it's going to happen. And a lot of it's like, okay, where's the level of leanness where we feel like we can actually start to increase calories? Because it's almost like an art, because it's like, okay, are we at our leanness? If we start increasing calories now, are we going to prevent you from getting leaner? Or will you get even leaner because now we're increasing calories? And let's say you just start to move around a lot more without really realizing it and you're expending more calories. So it's kind of like an art in a sense. But I mean, the whole theory behind it is like, obviously, like you've prepped, right? So when you hit a new low on the scale, it doesn't usually represent your best look
Yeah,
because you're depleted.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, you refeed a couple of days or what have you, like, okay, you're up 3 or 4 pounds or what have you, but you look better. You're fuller, you look harder because you got more glycogen, there's more water in the muscle, that type of thing. So you're a lot tighter. So it's kind of like same thing that's going on just on a broader scale, grander scale. So you're getting yourself to like that just most shredded condition. You're obviously going to be more depleted, but now it's okay. And now let's methodically start to increase calories, maybe bring steps down. So that way you get filled, you're filling out, you got more energy, your training is better, et cetera, et cetera. So that can be like in your case, it was 4 weeks, which is that's really nice, right? Some people it's just a week. It's like, okay, peak week, right? Okay, you get to eat for 3 days. That's still eating up into a show. It's just more on an acute scale.
That
Okay.
makes sense.
And the thing is too is like even if let's say if someone's behind the scale, like you're behind the timeline. Let's say you're trying last 4 weeks, like, oh shit, I got to push things a little bit harder. Like, okay, you get to the last week, maybe you're really depleted. But sometimes you can make a quick turnaround, like 2-3 days of a lot of food, a lot of carbs, and it's like, okay, we actually look pretty damn good.
Yeah.
So I don't get overly concerned if, let's say, specific athlete isn't like on point with being able to eat up, as long as it's not severely crash dieting it into a show, and we still have enough time to kind of have that person look as full as possible without looking overly depleted. So I mean, in practice, like in theory and in practice, that's what you kind of ideally would like to see. If I'm like big picture, like before the prep starts, right? A diet before the prep starts, clean it up, like get your body weight at a good starting position, maintain that. So that way you get everything picked back up, recharge your batteries. You're mentally ready to go again. Okay, now let's start the prep. Okay, however many pounds we need to take off, a good timeline for that, and then start eating up into a show, whether it's 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, whatever. Like you don't want to get to the finish line basically like just run down and looking overly depleted.
That makes sense. And that probably helps with extending your season, right? Because if you can just feed up into like you do your first show and you can feed up into all the other shows, you probably feel a lot better and you feel like you can handle continuing going with the prep. Because I feel like a lot of people, yeah, like if you're continuing to dig down and try to constantly always get leaner, like, yeah, you're gonna hit that breaking point.
Yeah, it's like
Whereas,
if you
yeah,
like in theory, like if he ate up for 4 weeks and he's like, okay, you got like an ideal look. He's lean, he's full, good energy. He feels like, okay, I feel kind of normal, even though he's probably not all the way normal. He's still normal, right? Considering like he could probably compete every weekend.
yeah,
It probably wouldn't have to manipulate too many variables to have him looking good every time. Like every day, I could get on stage today.
yeah, yeah. That's
Like even
awesome.
you right now, like if you really wanted to, you can probably get on stage every day and you would
Yeah,
still look the part right
Yeah.
now.
yeah,
Even though we can probably get you leaner, you're still pretty damn lean right now.
Yeah.
How does he know that?
So
Yeah.
it's like you can like right now, if you think about it, if we said let's stop getting leaner now, let's increase calories, like you'd really like I could do this every weekend if I wanted to.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
But again, you're a little more experienced, right? You've been training for a while, you know how to diet. But someone who's just starting out, first season, it's like, no, that's probably not going to end up how it happens.
That
Unless you
makes
just have someone who's like a little more in the elite as far as like mentality, adherence.
yeah. That makes sense. So for my competition prep, like I know we're probably like 2 to kind of 4 pounds away from stage weight. What do you kind of predict is going to happen with like my calories and with like possibly feeding into this first show or feeding into like the second and third show? Like what are your kind of thoughts on like what we'd be kind of doing in terms of that and maybe like the peak week and stuff like that?
So you're a month out from this first one, which is
I think I'm actually 5 week or think I'm 5 weeks out. Yeah, I
four to
would have to
five,
double check. Yeah, yeah,
somewhere in there. So I mean, you're predictable. Like you continue. I already seen you got a new low already. So you're continuing to drop. You know, made any adjustments. It's straightforward. So if anything, we could just rinse and repeat exactly what we're doing for this first one, and maybe test the waters a little bit with refeeds. Like maybe get a little more assertive with them.
yeah.
See what we get. Whether it's like, hey, maybe instead of two, maybe three. So we can go
Sweet.
three the same, or we can go two and just go a little higher with carbs. Um, Food sources, sodium, all that type of stuff, like consistency.
Yeah,
Because when you start adjusting things, like that's probably what we'll audit, right? Like 2 weeks out, let's make sure let's see what your menu looks like.
yeah.
And if there's anything there that looks like it could be suspicious, we toss it out. And we don't include anything new in a sense on the menu
That makes
because we don't know how you'd react to it.
yeah,
So especially I know you're consistent. Like you've been consistent the entire way through. So nothing really is going to change just because it's a peak week. I think that's where a lot of people go wrong. They title it peak week. Now all of
yeah,
a sudden it's like there's this heightened anxiety around this week, like it's super magical. But if you keep things rock solid all the way through, you're not going to see too many noticeable changes, you
yeah,
know? So you just
yeah.
keep the variables the same, maybe play around with refeeds a little bit, but outside of that, it's like no. And then we'll get data from that, right? So how do we look around all that? How is the backstage? Because the thing too is like we don't know how backstage is. So that's like it's unpredictable because most shows don't start on time. They're notoriously late
Yeah.
and there's always stress around that. My meals are off, and the pump up. We don't want to over pump to where you get on stage now you're tired, you can't pose. So a lot of things can really wreak havoc with how you're kind of looking on stage. But I just know, like from my own experience as an athlete, like every time I keep things more consistent and I keep my stress levels really low, I always look the best. You know,
That makes sense because like I know like stress itself can cause you to hold water, right? So
do
if you're
some
trying to
crazy things. Yeah.
manipulate all these different variables and like constantly stressing on that, you're probably just gonna have a shitty like you're just gonna
Yeah.
look a little bit more watery than if you just do like the exact same thing that you've been
Yeah.
doing this whole time.
One of my best peaks I had in my 2011 season, it wasn't even, we didn't even peak for the show. Like we didn't have a peak week.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, me and Alberto were like, we're going to do the NPC San Francisco. So it was just more like, hey, let's go do that for fun type thing. Family gets to see it. So the only thing we did for me was like, we had a refeed on Thursday. That was it. So everything else kind of stayed the same. And I just elevated carbs on that day and I kept my food sources relatively the same, made sure my hydration levels were the same.
Yeah.
And I just made sure like before I got on stage, I had a couple of meals and had a good pump and I peaked really good because I wasn't treating it as like, oh, I gotta like peak. It was like,
Yeah.
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 And the
It's
same
always
thing,
fun.
2014 was the same thing. Like for when I won the Pro International, it was, I think what really had me peaking super well there was the day before. My brother and I watched NFL Network in the hotel room for like a few hours the night before, had my feet up, and I was just chilling out, relaxing. I wasn't putting a lot of pressure on myself at all. And the mentality I had was like, whatever happens, happens. If I do good, good. If I don't, who cares? This is the best I can do. So let's just run with it.
That's awesome. Yeah, like for my first show this year, I'm kind of treating it as like a warm-up show. So I feel like I'll have less stress with that one because I don't really care how well I do on the like the CPA show because I want to try my best to get like the WMBF like pro card, either in like the men's physique or the bodybuilding. But like this first one, like it'll be interesting to see, because I feel like I'm not like super stressed with this one. I know the Vancouver, they may be a little bit more stressed with like the travel, and just because I want to
Yeah,
bring
that's
the
another
best.
topic of discussion. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because traveling, like I always like to get to where I'm going like 2 days before. Because trying to get there the day before, it's like, because you got to do like check-ins, weigh-ins, polygraph, what have you. And usually as a coach, I don't have athletes train the day before. I know like some coaches do it. They think, okay, if we do it, it might make it look tighter or what have you. But I'm like, that's just one more thing on your checklist the day before. You got all these other things you're trying to squeeze in. Like, what's one training session is going to make or break the work leading up to that? Probably not.
How
That
about
makes
like
Because to
sense.
just
me, it's
the
like if you're going,
cardiovascular?
yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Sometimes it can relieve some people's anxieties.
Yeah.
Hey, let's get you in there, train, just move around a little bit, So it's like, okay, calms nerves that way. But in general, like if you like most shows, like especially when you're traveling, you're traveling into the show. That if you're the day before, now you got to deal with the flights, rental cars, Ubers, whatever. You got to check into hotels. You got to get your food, tanning, polygraph, check-ins, whatever. It's like, and then you got all these people that you're trying to mingle with, and then now you got to try to go to the gym, and half the time you're mingling because you're training with other people. So it's like, to me, it's like sometimes it could be just a little bit too much for some people.
Yeah. So my other question was, so let's say, because I didn't struggle with it, but my wife did, during if you're traveling, and then so if you were in the same time zone, you probably go like 1 or 2 days, 2 days earlier. So that it was just like an hour difference for me from where we are. We're in PST time, and then to Calgary, that was only 1 hour ahead. And then I had to travel with her to Toronto last year, which was a 3 hour difference. And those days, we kind of didn't really sleep very well since there's a larger time difference. So if there was like a bigger time difference, say you had to travel like halfway through the world just to compete,
Mhm.
how many days earlier would you arrive at that destination?
Yeah, it'd be a little bit earlier. Like I had one guy from Brazil last year, and he traveled to New York first. I can't remember how many days ahead of that. He was going to travel from New York back to Brazil and then turn around and fly to Mayhem here in California. I'm like, you sure you want to do all that travel? Like, so I mean, what ended up happening, probably a blessing in disguise, that something to do with his flights. Like he couldn't fly back to Brazil, so he ended up staying here in the States. And he flew from New York here to California, and he was in Tahoe. And I just ended up telling him like, hey, just come stay at my house. So he came and stayed at my house 2 weeks before the show. And I think that helped out tremendously because it gave him a lot of stability. Because he's like, okay, I'm in one location. I got a nice gym in my garage. So he was able to train. He's able to cook his food in my kitchen. He was in my kitchen probably a little too much though. Um, but he got a lot of stability. So stress levels, and it probably helps that I was like there with him. So his stress levels went from here all the way down to here. So yeah, if I was traveling, like I've never traveled out of the country to compete. I've traveled across the US because I competed in New York.
Right.
And yeah, I get there like 2 days in advance. But I would imagine like if I was going to travel, let's say Europe, I would probably want to get there at least 3 or 4 days in advance just to get situated and to create stability and try to mimic like the same type of environment that I have here at home. Have all my food in order, kind of know where the gym situation is and how I'm getting to and from to places. Like just having everything, kind of covered from that perspective, just so I can keep stress levels a little bit on the lower side. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm more of my personality is more like I need to have everything kind of like this. And my wife is kind of the opposite. She's more of a free flower. So she's always trying to get me to, hey, just go with the flow. And I'm like, no, I got to do this. And that's why we work so well because we kind of meet in the middle. But
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, I could definitely see that. Like, I think with like the time differences too, and like the sleep differences, that's
yeah.
probably a big thing as well. Just
Mhm.
trying to get your sleep schedule like decent before you're stepping on stage, or else, yeah, I
Like
feel
we traveled to Australia in 2014 to do a seminar there. And that's a 15, 16 hour flight. I wasn't even dieting. I was like off season. On the way back, I
Yeah.
was so jet lagged. Like the entire week, my wife's like, "You need to go back to Australia. Like you're just moody." It was like it was really rough. So I couldn't imagine like being in a deficit and dealing with that type of time difference. So yeah, you definitely want to give yourself ample time.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. One question that I wanted to ask you to kind of, I think we're getting kind of close to the end of the podcast, but one big question that I wanted to ask you is like, what would you say is like the biggest advice for like a first time men's physique competitor or bodybuilder? Like, what are like what's your biggest advice to those kind of people that are just getting into bodybuilding and are wanting to do their first show? I know this could probably be a pretty massive answer, but
I could generalize it, right? But I
yeah,
think, I probably will generalize a little bit. Of course, you want to have fun, right? Like, that's
yeah,
the main thing. Why do this if you're not having fun with it? Like we're talking about how to strategize and all that, but in the end, think about it. What are you doing? You're getting in your underwear on stage. Like, how serious is that, really? If you think about it, right?
yeah,
You train really hard. Like, okay, if it's your first time, you've obviously put some time in the gym, you've trained hard, you're dieting, like you're putting a lot of work into this. So you would do yourself a disservice if you make it so stressful to the point where you're not actually enjoying it. So that's like my first thing is just relax, have fun with it. You're just going up there in your underwear. It's not a big deal. It's not the end of the world if you don't do well. If you do, great. But if you don't, well, guess what? You just gained a lot of experience for the next time. It'll make yourself that much better. Trust me, if you've seen pictures of my first show, you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. Um, and then I would say definitely it's probably worth getting a good coach in your corner
yeah,
because, in today's landscape, there's just so many coaches out there and not all of them have your best interests in order. Like you want to have someone who's not just going to think about, I'm going to get this person shredded. I want them to place high or whatever. So I can say, hey, look at my athlete here. It's not about me as a coach. It's about making sure that you guys are taken care of before you actually even start a prep. Like, are you in a good position to actually do that? Like physically, mentally, and emotionally, and not, like I said, not just that stuff, but also like logistically, like family life, home life, work life, like all these things. Like make sure this person's in a good place to actually do that, and make sure you're thinking of their health first and foremost while taking through that process, and think about how you're going to take that athlete after the show's over with. Like what is like the process you take this person through? If it's overly invasive, what's that going to do after? Are they going to have eating disorders, or are they going to have relationship issues? Like, that's what you don't see online, is like you just see an athlete go from A to B. Cool, they shredded, but what's the story behind that? Was it successful as far as overall balance, or was it like not?
yeah,
So if you're going to do this for the first time, like you definitely want to kind of like talk to coaches, maybe even talk to some of the athletes, follow their podcasts, like really just get a feel as far as what they're about and what their processes look like and what their values are. I think that's super important.
yeah. No,
I think,
that makes a lot of sense because yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of people have like get into like the eating disorders after like post show or have constant body dysmorphia and like yeah, being able to like set them up and let them know about what kind of happens with prep because I feel like a lot of people don't really talk about what you're actually going to be going through with this process. They think some people promote it as, oh, you're going to be like the fittest or healthiest you've ever been. And it's like, no, like that's not really like what we're doing here. Like, but like, yeah, definitely like like letting your clients know that is definitely, I would say, like a very, very huge thing.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I think a good coach will be able to help you like set realistic expectations,
Yeah.
with doing this for the first time. It's like, if your goal is like, hey, I'm getting a pro card this time out, it's like maybe that's not realistic right now.
That makes sense.
So like, hey, you got 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line where you can accomplish a lot of things. Because like I said, I've been doing this. You guys were in the womb,
Yeah.
when I was started doing this. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of progress to be made through decades.
Yes.
For sure.
And there is this question that I think I think that this message isn't enough out there. That what you just said, I agree on like a lot. Is there's so many newcomers into the gym. They see, they either support their friends or they support their coaches to watch your bodybuilding show, and then their coach win or their friends wins, and it motivates them. It ignites them to, hey, I could do this. It's really motivating. But then the downside is they become so outcome focused that all they can think about is just, I want to win and I want to just get this pro card and IFBB pro card. Everybody's just chasing the IFBB pro card because it's just so hard to get. And they become so focused on just that winning part, and they are willing to do whatever it takes. And that's what they start seeking, all these different coaches with blue ticks on their names and their IG handles, just even, they market themselves even that way. They say, like, do you have what it takes to become a pro? And people are picking up on that. I think this message that you brought was very, very important on, the quality of life, the well-being of the athlete itself before, during, and after that. So my question for you, if somebody wants to, get their feet wet in the natural bodybuilding and they come to you, but they have this mindset of, hey, Jeff, I just want to freaking get my pro card. I want to win. Not you, Brandon. You've been competing for quite a while, so you kind of understand that. But if somebody like new comes to you, like, what would your response be?
I've had those conversations before. It's actually like having a face-to-face conversation with that athlete. Like you can't just get an athlete's application intake and go, okay, on it, he says he wants to be a pro card. Okay, now I'm gonna just start coaching him towards it.
Yeah.
Like you want to get a feel and see where the knowledge base is at and see where that thought process is coming from. And then the best I can do is share my thoughts, share my experiences, because I used to be that guy when I was younger that had to win shows, and that's what it was all about. And I've seen what a dark path it kind of took me on at times. I think you can have those lofty goals because I do think it's healthy because obviously it pushes you to get better. But at the same time, you have to have, the expectations. Like maybe it's a goal that's not now.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a goal 5 years from now or 10 years from now. And in the end, really, if you think about it, like you want that power to define success. You want that power. Like in a sport of bodybuilding, like it's in a sense, I don't even really view it as a sport, to be honest with you. It's more like a art show
Yeah.
because you're getting like all these people in their underwear on stage and everybody has different genetics, like different shapes, sizes. And, it's really not a fair comparison sometimes. It's like apples and oranges. And you can't knock the person out next to you to win. Like I always say in podcasts, you can do that, but you're probably going to end up getting arrested. So it's like really just an art show. So you have the power to paint your own picture, display it how you want, and you have also the power to define what success is. So if you take my best physique of all time, which was 2014, and I had a fourth on my world's medal, and let's say that was 12th, it doesn't change the physique and it doesn't change how I prepared for that physique. The only thing that changes, like these people in front of me just put a number on it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change physique. Like 2 weeks from that, I can go to another show and maybe that 4 turns to a 1 or that 4 turns to a 19, depending on who's kind of there. So I think, you always want to kind of frame it like, okay, I'm just trying to fulfill current potential. If I happen to, win, cool. It's like cherry on top of a sundae. But in the end, it's like there's always someone out there who's better than you. They're just not standing on that stage at that particular point in time.
Yeah. That's well said for sure.
All right, that's really, really good. Yeah, I think that message was a very, very powerful message, and for a lot of the competitors
Knocked him in the
right
head.
now,
Knocked
yeah,
him out.
yeah, exactly, knock them in the head.
Just start fighting on stage.
But for for any competitor, this is just a side little question, I personally have. Would you, based on, if you see an athlete based on how they're either structurally built or how their lifting years have brought their physique to. Would you recommend them you're doing bodybuilding, or if they're not maybe not there, would you recommend them, your bench seems to be, doing quite well. You're probably, close to a national level in powerlifting. Maybe try that. Would you ask them to do that? Like try other sports besides bodybuilding?
I mean, I always encourage people to do what they want to do,
Yeah.
like first and foremost. So if I have someone come and say, I really want to do men's physique, but their physique looks like it's bodybuilding, and I know like, oh, they could probably dominate if they did bodybuilding.
Yeah.
I'm not going to push them to do bodybuilding. I'm going to push them to do men's physique because that's what they want to do.
Right. But would you recommend it? Yeah.
I can say, hey man, you would probably do pretty well in bodybuilding. You can always try both. Like you always, do men's physique and bodybuilding and see what the experience is like. Because, maybe they change their mind after actually doing it.
Yeah.
But I'm not one who's going to say, like, look at a physique without talking to a person and then, okay, this person's definitely like bodybuilding. And then when I start talking to them, I just start pushing bodybuilding. Like to me, I was like, okay, because I'll get that question from some people, like, what do you think I should do? And I'm like, what do you want to do? What's your heart telling you want to do? Like, or I'll ask it, like, when you watch it online, you see shows, like, what excites you? Is it men's physique? Is it classic? Is it bodybuilding? And whatever they kind of gravitate towards, I'm like, okay, well, that's maybe what we try for. Unless, let's say, like, it's just really like not realistic. Let's say they want to do bodybuilding, they got like really thin legs, like, right. I'm like, okay, at that point, like I might try to persuade them to do men's physique.
Yeah.
So there's always like, some situations where it's like, okay, I'll override maybe what they want and I'll kind of guide them that way. But in general, I think the more things you experience, like obviously you're going to be able to, broaden your perspectives on things.
Yeah. I also think too, like the more, like if you really want to do a certain class, like the more effort you're going to put into the posing, into the training and the nutrition. Whereas if you're doing something that you don't really necessarily want to do, you're probably not going to put whatever it takes to like get that outcome. So I think that's how I see it as well.
Yeah. If someone is like, hey Jeff, you do really good in men's physique, I'd be like,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to discredit men's physique. It's just for me personally, like I really enjoy like bodybuilding posing.
Yeah.
Like to me, it's like I like to be able to show a lot more muscularity, and my personality fit. That's another thing, is my personality fits bodybuilding, men's physique, and it's like, I just don't have that pizzazz and that flair. My personality is just a little more low key. So it's just for me, my personality fits that. Like I've had some like women that they may not have a bikini body, they have maybe, figure or whatever. And, just kind of just depends on the body, their personalities, what they want to do. Like I take all that in consideration, try to guide them the best I can. But in the end, it's your journey.
Yeah.
You should be able to do what you want. And I'm not one who's going to tell you what show to do either. Like some coaches will say, oh, do this show or do that show. Like what shows, like here's some federations that I might say, okay, these are the ones that, I tend to favor, but this is your journey. Whatever show you want to do, I'll support it. The main thing is just, try to have fun with it.
Makes sense.
That's really, really good. I think we've, provided a lot of value and a lot of insights for these perspectives on, prepping and bodybuilding, and also prepping multiple shows through the year. I think, Jeff, you really made a really good recommendation and some very valuable information on, what's Brandon's, this 2023, what's going to look like. Really, really good insights. So, Brandon, do you have anything, to
add to it?
Sure. Yeah, add to it.
No, I just, thanks again so much for coming on here. Like it's been a pleasure to have you on our podcast, and we definitely really appreciate it.
No, you're welcome. It was an honor. Yeah.
I would link the Godfather's information down at the description, and on if you're watching on YouTube. And also we are here every week. Come follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and also please like and subscribe our YouTube if you like our content. We really appreciate you guys. We'll see you guys next